So imagine you are reading the official authorized biography of a legendary national founder.
Right, like the ultimate historical hero.
Exactly. We are talking about the kind of figure whose face is carved into mountains,
Yeah.
printed on the currency.
Yeah, you definitely expect the book to be a total masterclass in public relations.
Right. The biographer is supposed to highlight the military genius, the stirring speeches, the completely unblemished legacy.
That's just how these things usually go.
But then, right in the middle of this pristine historical account, you turn the page and you stumble into what reads like, well, a graphic, unredacted police report.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Suddenly, you are staring at a deeply detailed account of this hero orchestrating a political assassination.
Yeah.
And it's all to cover up his own sexual assault.
Which is just jarring.
Completely. You are reading about his catastrophic failures as a father, his profound psychological unraveling, and his entire kingdom plunging into a devastating civil war.
It really shatters the entire mythological framework we usually build around historical figures, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, it's shocking.
Because ancient literature, especially royal annals from the ancient Near East, it was essentially state-sponsored propaganda.
Right. They wanted to look good.
Exactly. Kings commissioned these massive monuments just to boast about their infallibility. They basically never recorded their defeats.
Let alone their moral bankruptcies.
Exactly. Yet, the text we are opening today does exactly that. It leaves the dirt, the blood, and the catastrophic moral failures right there on the parchment for everyone to see.
Well, welcome to this deep dive. Today, for you, our listener, we are taking a highly personalized journey into a foundational piece of source material.
We are looking at Chris R. Velazquez's comprehensive survey of the Book of 2 Samuel.
Yes, and our mission here is not just to summarize some dusty, archaic religious scroll. We are exploring what is basically a gritty, unvarnished political and theological masterpiece.
It really is a masterpiece.
It's a text that tackles the brutal realities of power, the absolute devastation of moral failure, and ultimately the human search for a leader who won't eventually break our hearts.
And to really grasp the gravity of what we're looking at, I think we have to establish the canonical context first.
Okay, let's do that. Where are we starting?
Well, if you were holding the original Hebrew text, back in the day, you wouldn't find a 1 Samuel and a 2 Samuel.
Wait, really? They weren't separate books?
No, they were originally one massive, continuous scroll.
Oh, wow. I never knew that.
Yeah, the division we use today only happened centuries later when the text was translated into Greek.
Just for space reasons.
Exactly. The Greek translation required more physical space, so it had to be split onto two separate scrolls.
That makes so much sense. So 2 Samuel doesn't actually have an introduction?
No, it drops you immediately into the aftermath of a catastrophe.
Yeah.
It picks up the very second that 1 Samuel ends.
Right, following the tragic, violent death of Israel's very first king, Saul, on Mount Gilboa.
And then it chronicles the incredibly turbulent rise of his successor, which is David.
And whether you are a theology buff, a student of political science, or, just someone trying to navigate your own leadership roles and messy family dynamics, this text is the ultimate case study.
It truly is.
Because if there is one overarching thesis we are going to extract from this deep dive for you today, it is this. Competence without character is a recipe for absolute ruin.
That is the perfect way to summarize it.
But before we get to the ruin, we have to look at the world this is actually happening in. We are dropping into the early Iron Age Levant.
Right. We're talking the 10th century BCE.
And Israel is in this incredibly precarious transition phase.
Yeah, they are trying to move from a fragile, really disorganized tribal confederation into a centralized monarchy.
The geopolitical reality of this era is just fascinating. You have these 12 independent tribes of Israel, right?
Yes, and for centuries, they have basically operated on an ad hoc, decentralized system of judges.
But that system is completely failing now.
It is, because the technological and military landscape of the ancient Near East is rapidly changing.
Specifically because of the Philistines.
Exactly. The Philistines occupy the coastal plains, and they have mastered ironworking.
Which is a huge deal.
It's massive. They have a centralized military hierarchy, they have chariots, and a literal monopoly on blacksmithing.
So Israel is essentially fighting a highly organized, iron-wielding superpower with Bronze Age farm tools and scattered militias.
That is exactly the situation.
I always pictured this moment in Israel's history as a chaotic, scrappy startup that is just desperately trying to go corporate.
I love that analogy. It fits perfectly.
Like, they've been running on this disorganized garage band energy for centuries, but their competitors, the Philistines, have massive supply chains and corporate infrastructure.
Right, they are getting outpaced.
Yeah, and the startup realizes that if they don't get a unifying CEO, a centralized king to organize taxation, standing armies, and logistics, they are going to be completely wiped out.
But the structural growing pains of suddenly becoming a centralized state are immense.
Oh, I can only imagine.
And that transition is grounded in hard archaeology, which is crucial to point out.
Because for a long time, the academic consensus leaned heavily toward skepticism.
Right. Very much so. A significant portion of scholars argued that David just wasn't a real historical figure.
They thought he was made up.
Yeah. They viewed him as an ancient myth, sort of like an Arthurian legend.
Oh, like a story invented centuries later to give a devastated nation a heroic backstory.
Precisely. A Golden Age myth invented by later Jewish scribes.
Yeah.
But that skepticism hit a massive roadblock.
Right. The Teldan stele. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yes, the Teldan stele is huge.
Because this is one of those literal aha moments in historical research. We aren't talking about a biblical text here.
No, not at all.
We are talking about a broken piece of basalt rock found in northern Israel.
Dating back to the 9th century BCE, which is just a century or so after David would have actually lived.
And it's a victory monument, right?
Yes. It was carved in Aramaic by an enemy king, likely King Hazael of Aram Damascus.
And what does it say?
Well, on this stone, this foreign king is bragging about his military conquests.
Standard king stuff.
Right. But he explicitly claims to have killed a king of Israel and a king of the house of David.
The phrase House of David, carved in stone by an enemy, that completely changes the historical landscape.
It absolutely does.
It proves that the dynasty wasn't just a late literary invention. A literal, recognized geopolitical entity named after David existed and was known to surrounding nations.
Shortly after his reign, no less. It forces us to treat the historical core of the biblical text very seriously.
That is wild.
And our understanding of the text itself has been completely revolutionized by the Dead Sea Scrolls, too.
Oh, specifically the Samuel fragments found in the caves at Qumran, right?
Yes, because for centuries, translators really struggled with the book of Samuel.
Why is that?
The traditional Hebrew text, what we call the Masoretic text, which was meticulously copied by Jewish scholars in the Middle Ages, has some significant gaps.
Gaps and confusing, garbled phrasings, from what I understand.
Exactly. It was like trying to read a brilliant novel where a few pages had been totally smudged by water damage.
I've always wondered about that. I mean, how do we know what the text is supposed to say if the oldest complete Hebrew version has smudges?
Well, for a long time, scholars relied on the Septuagint.
Which is the Greek translation, right?
Yeah, it's an ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible created around the 3rd century BCE.
Okay, so a lot older than the medieval Hebrew copies.
Right. And the Greek version of Samuel read much smoother and actually had extra details.
But scholars weren't sure if the Greek translators had just added things to fix the text themselves.
Exactly. They didn't know if the Greeks smoothed it out or if they were translating from an older, better Hebrew scroll that had just been lost to history.
Enter the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Enter the Dead Sea Scrolls. In the 1940s and 50s, we find these Hebrew manuscripts dating back to the 3rd and 1st centuries BCE.
Which is over 1,000 years older than the Masoretic text.
Right. And when scholars rolled out the Samuel fragments from Qumran, they realized these ancient Hebrew scrolls often matched the Greek Septuagint perfectly.
Oh, wow. So the Greek translators weren't just making things up to smooth out the story?
No, they're looking at a pristine, much older Hebrew tradition that the Dead Sea Scrolls finally corroborated for us.
That is incredible. So it allows us to piece together the narrative with incredible clarity.
Precisely. And beyond the scrolls, you have the ongoing excavations at the city of David in Jerusalem.
Right, where archaeologists are uncovering massive, monumental Iron Age stone structures.
Like the large stone structure and the stepped stone structure.
While the exact dating is, fiercely debated, These massive public works demonstrate that a major geopolitical center was taking shape in Jerusalem.
Exactly when the text says David was centralizing his new kingdom.
Which is so cool. But this brings us to a massive logistical problem.
What's that?
Well, if David is a real historical figure stepping into this massive power vacuum after the death of Israel's first king, Saul, how does he actually get the throne?
Ah, right.
Because a power vacuum in the ancient world usually means an absolute bloodbath.
It almost always does.
When a king dies, the next guy in line usually slaughters everyone remotely connected to the previous regime just to secure his position.
True. But the immediate aftermath of Saul's death, covering chapters 1 through 10 of 2 Samuel, shows David navigating this exact minefield differently.
Yeah, he has tremendous military momentum, he has a loyal band of warriors, and widespread popularity.
But the way he handles the transition is completely counterintuitive to ancient Near Eastern power dynamics.
It really is. It starts the moment he hears about Saul's death.
The opening scene is just wild. David is essentially in exile.
Right. He receives news that Saul, the man who has been hunting him down like an animal for years, literally forcing him to live in caves, is dead in battle.
And the guy who brings him the news is an Amalekite.
Right, and this Amalekite actually claims that he was the one who delivered the final fatal blow to Saul.
You can completely see this guy's thought process, too.
Oh, totally. He thinks he's walking into David's camp with the winning lottery ticket.
He assumes David wants his biggest rival dead.
So he brings Saul's crown and armband to David, clearly expecting a massive financial reward, or like a high-ranking position in the new government.
But David's reaction totally shatters the Amalekite's pragmatic, worldly expectations.
He doesn't throw parade.
No. David tears his clothes, he mourns, he fasts, and then he orders the Amalekite executed.
Which, I mean, that seems brutal to modern sensibilities. But David's reasoning is deeply theological, isn't it?
Yes. He executes him because the Amalekite claimed to have raised his hand against the Lord's anointed.
Wow.
This introduces a profound concept of restraint into the narrative. David absolutely refuses to celebrate the demise of his enemy.
Instead, he composes this incredibly moving public lament called the Song of the Bow,
where he mourns Saul and Saul's son Jonathan. And he orders the people of Judah to learn this song.
It's so countercultural, and this is heavily tied to the ancient honor-shame culture, right?
It is. In that world, honor was a tangible public good, and shame was socially catastrophic.
So by publicly mourning Saul, David categorically refuses to build his throne on the dishonor of his predecessor.
Exactly. He's basically broadcasting to the entire nation, I am not a warlord. I am not seizing power through opportunism.
He deeply understands the Hebrew concept of, Masha.
Yes, Masha. What it means to be anointed.
Because David himself was anointed by the prophet Samuel years earlier, so he believes his kingship is a divine guarantee.
Right. And because it is guaranteed by God, he doesn't have to force it through political assassination. He can wait for divine timing.
It is a total masterclass in political patience and moral restraint.
It really is. Because over the next several chapters, a grueling civil war breaks out.
You have David's faction in the south operating out of Hebron, and then the remnants of Saul's dynasty in the north.
Right, propped up by Saul's ruthless military commander, Abner.
Who basically places Saul's weak son, Ishbosheth, on the throne as a puppet.
Exactly. And throughout this entire messy, bloody conflict, David actively distances himself from the dirty work.
He continuously denounces the, black ops-style wet work that usually characterizes these transitions.
Yes. When his own brilliant but utterly pragmatic commander, Joab, murders Saul's general Abner out of revenge, David is furious.
He publicly curses Joab's family, doesn't he?
He does. He forces Joab to walk in Abner's funeral procession in torn clothes, and David himself weeps at Abner's grave.
And later, when two opportunistic raiders assassinate Saul's son Ishbosheth in his bed.
And bring his severed head to David again, expecting a reward.
Right. David is furious. He executes them, hangs their bodies by the pool in Hebron as a public warning, and gives Ishbosheth an honorable burial.
He simply refuses to let his ascent to the throne be stained by treachery.
He waits until the northern tribes are completely exhausted by the civil war.
And finally, in chapter 5, all the elders of Israel come to David voluntarily.
They recognize his military success, they acknowledge his divine anointing, and they willingly submit to him as king over a united nation.
He didn't hack his way to the crown, it was essentially handed to him.
And once he is king over a united Israel, his first major move is just geopolitical genius.
Capturing Jebus.
Yes. He captures the fortress of Jebus, which is this neutral, heavily fortified city sitting right on the border between the northern and southern tribes.
He renames it Jerusalem, the city of David, and establishes it as his capital.
It's a brilliant unifying move. It's so similar to how Washington, D.C. was established between the northern and southern states in America.
That's a great comparison. But David knows that political and military centralization isn't enough to hold these historically fractured tribes together.
Right, he needs theological centralization.
He needs to make Jerusalem the spiritual heart of the nation.
So in chapter 6, he decides to bring the Ark of the Covenant, the ultimate symbol of God's presence, which had been neglected for decades, into his new capital.
And this brings us to one of the most jarring, difficult narratives in the entire text.
The Uzzah incident.
Yes, it is a passage that deeply troubles modern readers.
I'll say. So they put the Ark on a brand new cart pulled by oxen to parade it into the city.
It's a massive celebration. Thousands of people, music playing.
The oxen hit a rough patch of road and stumble, and the Ark looks like it's going to slide off the cart into the mud.
And a guy named Uzzah, who is guiding the cart, instinctively reaches out his hand to steady it.
And God strikes him dead on the spot.
Yes.
Hold on. This guy Uzzah puts out his hand to stop the most sacred object in Israel from falling in the dirt, and he's executed.
It's shocking.
How are we supposed to read that without thinking God is just capricious and vindictive?
It is a terrifying moment. And the text actually says David himself was angry and terrified by it.
I don't blame him.
But to understand it, we really have to strip away our modern casual assumptions about the divine. We have to step into the ancient theology of holiness.
Okay, unpack that for me.
In the ancient biblical worldview, holiness is not just a moral category. It is almost like a physical property.
A physical property.
Yes, it is absolute, radiant, uncompromising purity. God is the source of all life, and human beings, who are broken and corrupted, cannot casually interact with that unmediated presence without being destroyed.
You know, it makes me think of high voltage electricity.
Oh, that's a really interesting way to look at it.
Like, let's say a major power line falls in your neighborhood. You don't just casually walk up and grab the downed wire to move it out of the street.
No, absolutely not.
Even if you are trying to be helpful. Because if you don't respect the sheer uncompromising power of that electricity and approach it with the absolute strictest safety protocols, it will kill you.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter what your intentions are. The electricity isn't evil. It's just a force that cannot be treated casually.
That is a phenomenal analogy. And the Torah, the ancient law of Moses, had explicitly laid out the safety protocols for the ark.
What were they?
Well, it was never to be placed on a cart, like a piece of captured idol furniture, which ironically is actually how the Philistines transported it years earlier.
Oh, so David was kind of copying the Philistines?
He was. But the law commanded that the ark must be carried on the shoulders of specific priests, the Kohathites, using long poles slid through rings on the side of the ark.
So it was never to be touched directly.
Never. So David and Uzzah were essentially treating the ark with pragmatism. Let's just put it on a cart. It's faster. It's more efficient.
They ignored the divine protocol.
Exactly. Uzzah's death is a profound shock to David's system because it shatters the illusion that he can manage or manipulate God.
God is not a mascot for David's new political administration.
No. Human pragmatism does not override divine holiness. So David halts the procession immediately.
He's probably terrified to move it any further.
He is. He leaves the ark at a nearby house for 3 months, figures out the correct, reverent way to transport it according to the law, and only then brings it into Jerusalem.
And when he does, it's with immense reverence, sacrifices every 6 steps, and uninhibited worship.
Right. It's a total shift in posture.
We also see David's character really shine in this era through his treatment of Saul's surviving lineage, right? Over in chapter 9.
Yes, because in the ancient world, a new king would typically exterminate the previous dynasty down to the last infant.
Just to prevent any future rebellions or claims to the throne.
Exactly. But David actively searches out anyone left in Saul's house to show them kindness. And he finds Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson.
And Mephibosheth's story is just tragic.
It really is. When the news of Saul's death reached the capital years earlier, Mephibosheth's nurse picked him up to flee in a panic.
Right.
But she dropped him, and he was permanently crippled in both feet.
So he has been living in hiding, terrified that David's men will eventually find him and kill him.
But when David finds him, he doesn't execute him.
No. He restores all of Saul's vast family lands to him, and he gives him a permanent seat at the royal dining table.
This is the Hebrew concept of he said in action, isn't it?
Ah, right. He said.
Yes. Hayes is one of the most important words in the Hebrew Bible. It means covenant loyalty, steadfast love, or merciful kindness.
And David is acting as a patron here, right? Bound by a previous sacred oath of friendship he made to Mephibosheth's father, Jonathan.
Exactly. He elevates this crippled, fearful grandson of his enemy. It's a breathtaking picture of unmerited grace.
Mephibosheth literally says, "What is your servant that you should show regard for a dead dog such as I?"
And yet, he eats at the king's table like one of the king's own sons.
It's beautiful. So let's look at where David is at this exact moment in the text.
He's completely won.
Right. He has secured the borders, centralized the government, repelled the Philistines, established an administrative bureaucracy, and brought the presence of God right into his new capital.
He is sitting in a newly built, luxurious palace made of imported cedar wood.
And as he looks around, a thought creeps into his mind. He thinks, I've got this incredible palace, but the Ark of God is still sitting in a tent.
Right.
He thinks, I need to build God a massive permanent temple.
Which is a very natural urge for an ancient king. Building a temple secures your legacy, proves your piety, and cements your dynasty.
But God's response to this idea flips the script entirely. And this brings us to chapter 7, which is arguably the theological pivot of the entire book.
It absolutely is. 2 Samuel 7 is the bedrock of the rest of biblical history.
Okay, let's unpack that.
It actually hinges on a brilliant piece of Hebrew wordplay.
Oh, I love a good ancient wordplay.
David tells his court prophet Nathan that he wants to build a house for God. The Hebrew word he uses is beit,
Beit. Got it.
which can mean a physical building or a temple. And Nathan initially says, "Sounds great, go for it, God is with you."
But God intercepts the plan.
That night, God speaks to Nathan. He tells Nathan, "Go back to David and tell him, you are not going to build me a beit. Instead, I'm going to build you a beit."
But God doesn't mean a building made of stone and cedar.
No, he means a dynasty, a royal family line.
Oh, wow. So he flips the meaning of the word.
Precisely. God establishes what theologians call the Davidic Covenant.
And what are the terms of that covenant?
God promises that David's seed, his zera in Hebrew, meaning his descendants, will sit on the throne forever.
So he literally says, your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me.
Yes, your throne shall be established forever.
So what does this all mean? Why is this single conversation so critical to the rest of the text?
Because it shifts the entire trajectory of redemptive progression in the biblical narrative. Think about the massive promises God has made so far in the texts.
Okay.
In Genesis, you have the Abrahamic promise of a family and land. In Exodus, you have the Mosaic promise of a nation bound by a law.
And now, in 2 Samuel, we arrive at this Davidic promise of an eternal kingdom.
Exactly. This is the origin point of all future messianic hope.
Really? All of it?
Yes. When you read the book of Psalms, or when the prophet Isaiah talks about a future child being born who will sit on the throne of David,
Oh, right.
or when you open the New Testament and Jesus of Nazareth is repeatedly hailed as the son of David, it all traces directly back to this specific promise into 6 Samuel 7.
That is massive. But let's look at this from David's immediate perspective for a second.
Sure.
If I'm David and I just heard the creator of the universe say, your throne is guaranteed forever, doesn't that create a massive psychological tension?
It creates a huge tension.
Because if the promise is forever, is that essentially a blank check for bad behavior?
That's the danger, yes.
Like if I'm David, don't I just hear, I can do whatever I want, I can abuse my power, I can take whatever I want, and God won't fire my family?
Well, the text forces you to hold that exact tension, because the covenant establishes a profound balance between unconditional grace and conditional discipline.
Explain that balance.
In that same oracle, God says regarding David's future descendants, "When he commits iniquity, I will discipline him with the rod of men, but my steadfast love will not depart from him as I took it from Saul."
Okay, so the royal line won't be utterly annihilated. The unconditional promise stands. But personal sin will still bring devastating, brutal, temporal consequences.
Exactly.
And that exact blank check hypothesis is about to be put to the test in the most devastating way possible.
It really is.
The king who had shown so much restraint on his way to the top, who refused to kill his enemies, who respected God's holiness, who showed mercy to the crippled, is about to start believing his own hype.
The safety of the palace breeds complacency, and complacency breeds an unimaginable abuse of power.
We are moving into chapters 11 and 12, the view from the roof.
The narrator sets the scene here with a detail that just drips with devastating irony.
Yeah.
We're told in the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David remained at Jerusalem.
It's such a brief logistical detail, but it reveals his entire psychological state.
It does. Spring is when the weather clears up, the mud dries, and armies can actually move their supply chains.
And the nation is at war with the Ammonites right now. David's men are out in the field bleeding in the dirt.
But David is delegating the hard work. He's staying home in royal leisure.
He is completely insulated by his own success.
Yes, he is restless, pacing on the flat roof of his palace in the evening. And because the city of David was built on a steep slope, the palace roof sat higher than all the surrounding houses.
So he literally has this vantage point of absolute elevated power.
Right, and from there he looks down and sees a woman bathing. This is Bathsheba.
And what follows is a stark, brutal depiction of how absolute power corrupts.
It really is.
You know, I think people often read this story as a mutual romance or a scandalous love affair, like a Hollywood romance.
Yes, pop culture has kind of painted it that way.
But the text doesn't read that way at all, does it?
Not in the slightest. The text emphasizes David's unilateral agency and Bathsheba's complete lack of it.
He just takes her.
He inquires about her first. He finds out she is the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite.
Both of whom are listed elsewhere as belonging to David's elite inner circle of mighty men. He knows exactly who she is.
He does. He knows her husband is currently fighting David's war. Yet David sends messengers to take her anyway.
And the Hebrew grammar here is chillingly brief and active on David's part, right?
Very much so. He took her, he lay with her, she returned to her house. It is an act of sheer, overpowering royal entitlement.
And when Bathsheba discovers she is pregnant and sends word to David, his response is completely devoid of repentance.
He doesn't fall on his face before God.
No. He essentially goes into full crisis management mode. He tries to handle the situation like a modern political fixer, trying to bury a scandal.
His initial plan is highly calculating. He recalls Uriah the Hittite from the front lines under the guise of wanting a status report on the war.
Like a fake performance review.
Exactly. After a brief chat, David tells Uriah to go down to his house and wash his feet.
Which is a euphemism, right?
Yes, it's a euphemism for relaxing and enjoying his wife. David's goal is simple. Get Uriah to sleep with Bathsheba so the pregnancy will look like Uriah's.
He even sends a royal gift of food to Uriah's house to sweeten the deal.
But Uriah inadvertently ruins the cover-up through his own sheer moral integrity.
Which is just wild. He refuses to go home. He sleeps at the door of the king's palace with the palace guards.
The contrast the author builds here is the crux of the narrative's moral judgment.
How so?
David calls Uriah back the next day and asks, "Why didn't you go home?" And Uriah, a foreigner, a Hittite by birth who has assimilated into Israel, delivers a speech demonstrating incredible covenant solidarity.
What does he say?
He says, "The ark and Israel and Judah dwell in booths, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are camping in the open field. Shall I then go to my house to eat and to drink and to lie with my wife? As you live, I will not do this thing."
Oh my goodness. Uriah is more devoted to the cause of Israel, to the ark of God, and to his brothers in arms than the king of Israel is.
Yes. Uriah's righteousness completely exposes David's corruption. Even when David gets Uriah drunk the next night, Uriah still refuses to go home to his wife while his men are at war.
So David escalates. When manipulation fails, he turns to murder.
He writes a letter to his commander, Joab, instructing him to place Uriah in the fiercest part of the battle.
And then have the troops pull back, leaving Uriah exposed to be slaughtered by the enemy.
And in a moment of unmatched callousness, David seals this letter and hands it to Uriah to deliver.
Wait, Uriah literally carries his own death warrant back to the front lines.
He does.
That is just evil. And Joab, who is the ultimate ruthless pragmatist, follows the order perfectly.
He orchestrates a tactical blunder that gets Uriah and several other Israelites killed just to accomplish David's hit.
And when the messenger brings the news of Uriah's death back to David, David's response is sickeningly casual.
He basically says, "Don't let it bother you. The sword devours one as well as another."
Just writing it off as collateral damage in war.
Huh.
So he marries Bathsheba, the baby is born, and David thinks he got away with it.
The cover-up was successful in his eyes.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because the narrator adds one crucial, ominous sentence at the end of chapter 11.
But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord.
Right. David was a master at managing his PR and burying his sins in the fog of war. But you cannot run a PR campaign against divine omniscience.
God sends the prophet Nathan to pierce the bubble.
And I am fascinated by Nathan's psychological approach here, because he doesn't walk into the throne room and immediately accuse the king.
No, in the ancient world, pointing a finger at an absolute monarch and calling him a murderer is a great way to get yourself executed on the spot.
So Nathan uses a story. He approaches David as the supreme judge of the land and presents a legal case disguised as a parable.
It is a brilliant piece of prophetic subversion.
Tell the story, because it's so perfectly crafted.
Nathan tells David about a rich man who had vast, countless flocks of sheep and cattle. And living next to him was a poor man who had absolutely nothing.
Nothing except for one little ewe lamb that he had bought.
Right. And the poor man raised this lamb in his house. It drank from his cup. It slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him.
And then a traveler comes to visit the rich man.
And the rich man refused to take an animal from his own massive flock to prepare a meal. Instead, he forcibly took the poor man's single beloved lamb and slaughtered it.
It is the perfect trap. It bypasses David's defenses by appealing to his deepest, oldest identity.
Because before David was a king, he was a shepherd.
Exactly. He knows what it is to protect a lamb. So when David hears this story of the rich man's callous, arrogant theft, his old sense of justice flares up into a white-hot rage.
He stops acting like a cynical politician and reacts like a shepherd.
He slams his fist down and says, "As the Lord lives, the man who has done this deserves to die. He shall restore the lamb fourfold because he did this thing and had no pity."
David pronounces his own judgment.
And then Nathan springs the trap, delivering what might be the most devastating 4 words in the Hebrew Bible.
You are the man.
Oof, it gives me chills every time.
Nathan methodically dismantles David's delusion. He reminds David of everything God had freely given him.
Deliverance from Saul, the throne, the wives, the entire house of Israel and Judah.
Nathan says, if that were too little, God would have given you even more. Why have you despised the word of the Lord? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and have taken his wife to be your wife.
And to David's credit, his response in this moment is the only thing that separates his legacy from King Saul's, isn't it?
It is. When Saul was confronted with his sins earlier in history, he made excuses, he blamed the people, he justified his actions.
But David, stripped of all his power and pretense by the word of the prophet, offers no excuses. He simply says, "I have sinned against the Lord."
It is a total psychological collapse.
Yeah.
But it's a necessary one.
Which brings us to the profound theology of repentance in the text.
Yes, because Nathan tells David, the Lord also has put away your sin. You shall not die.
So grace is immediate. David's covenant standing with God is restored, but, and this is a massive, crushing but, that grace does not erase the temporal consequences of his actions.
This is a vital point for the listener to grasp. Forgiveness in this text does not mean immunity from consequence.
Nathan prophesies a series of brutal judgments, right?
He does. Because David struck down Uriah with the sword will never depart from David's house. Because David took another man's wife in secret, David's own wives will be taken and violated in broad daylight.
And the child conceived in the adultery becomes terribly ill. David fasts, weeps, and lies on the ground for a week, pleading for the child's life. But the child dies.
It proves that grace isn't a time machine.
Wow, that's well said. You can be entirely forgiven by God, you can have a clean slate spiritually, but the scar tissue of your actions remains.
You still have to live in the wreckage you created.
The collateral damage doesn't magically disappear, and that collateral damage propels us into chapters 13 through 20, the unraveling of the kingdom.
The private sins of the father are about to become the public destruction of the entire nation.
What follows is a catastrophic ripple effect that spans years. The exact sins David committed in secret sexual exploitation, abuse of power, and premeditated murder erupt publicly in the lives of his children.
The narrative focuses on 3 of David's children: his oldest son and heir apparent, Amnon, his beautiful daughter, Tamar, and Tamar's full brother, Absalom.
The story of Amnon and Tamar in chapter 13 is one of the most horrific, difficult passages in the Bible.
It really is. Amnon becomes deeply obsessed with his half-sister Tamar. He is physically sick with lust because, as a virgin princess, she is kept segregated in the women's quarters, out of his reach.
So Amnon's cousin, Jonadab, gives him a deeply manipulative piece of advice. He tells Amnon to feign illness, go to bed, and when King David comes to check on him, ask that Tamar be sent to his room,
under the guise of baking special bread for him so he can eat it from her hand.
Amnon uses his father's affection to trap his sister, and David unknowingly facilitates the assault by ordering Tamar to go to Amnon's house.
Once she is there, and the servants are dismissed, Amnon overpowers her.
And the text is brutal in its realism here. Tamar's moral agency and clarity in this scene are striking compared to her brother's base urges.
She pleads with him. She says, "No, my brother, do not violate me, for such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do this outrageous folly."
She even tries to reason with him, saying that if he just asks the king will give her to him in marriage.
But he refuses to listen. He rapes her.
And then, in a sickening twist of psychological revulsion, immediately after the assault, Amnon is filled with an intense hatred for her.
A hatred that the text says was greater than the lust he had felt before. He orders his servant to throw her out and lock the door behind her.
The cultural details here are just heartbreaking. Tamar is wearing a long, ornamented robe with sleeves, the distinctive garment of the virgin daughters of the king.
It was a symbol of her status, her purity, and her future.
When she is thrown into the street, she tears that royal robe, puts ashes on her head, lays her hand on her head, and walks away crying aloud. Her life, her honor, and her future have been completely destroyed by the future king of Israel.
And this brings us to the defining failure of David's life.
What does David, the great king of justice, the man who was so enraged by the parable of the stolen lamb, do when he hears that his oldest son has raped his daughter?
The text notes that David was very angry, but he does absolutely nothing.
He fails to discipline Amnon. He refuses to enact justice within his own household.
Likely because Amnon is his firstborn and heir, and perhaps because David's own guilt regarding Bathsheba has paralyzed his moral authority.
Right. How can he judge his son for sexual violence when he himself is guilty of the same?
Exactly. This passivity is an institutional indictment against David's failed justice system.
And this massive vacuum of justice leaves space for Tamar's full brother Absalom to step in.
Absalom takes Tamar into his house, telling her to remain quiet for now. And then Absalom waits.
He waits 2 full years. 2 years of silent, seething, calculating hatred.
Absalom is a terrifyingly patient man. After 2 years, he hosts a massive sheep-shearing festival, which is a traditional time of feasting and drinking.
And he invites all the king's sons, including Amnon.
When Amnon is drunk, Absalom orders his servants to assassinate him in cold blood.
Absalom has avenged his sister, but in doing so, he has committed fratricide. He immediately flees the country and goes into exile in Geshur for 3 years.
So David has now lost 3 children to his own legacy of sin.
The infant born to Bathsheba is dead, Amnon is murdered, and Absalom is a fugitive.
David was a spectacularly successful military commander. He conquered nations, stabilized the economy, set up a massive bureaucracy, but he is an absolute failure as a father and a judge over his own house.
I think a lot of people read this and wonder if the text is making a direct causal link. Like, is it saying that to have that level of career and political success, you inevitably have to neglect your family?
The text isn't implying that career success requires family neglect as a rule. It's making a much sharper theological and political point.
Which is?
A leader who cannot govern his own desires cannot govern his household. And a leader who cannot govern his household will eventually lose his nation.
True justice has to start at home. Because David abdicated his role as a father and a judge in the Amnon situation, Absalom completely loses faith in his father's administration.
And we see that play out masterfully when Absalom eventually returns to Jerusalem.
Right. After a very messy, pragmatic mediation by Joab, David allows Absalom to return, but refuses to see his face for another 2 years.
When they finally reconcile, it's a very cold, hollow peace.
And Absalom immediately begins a long, slow, incredibly charismatic campaign to steal the hearts of the nation and launch a coup.
Absalom's strategy is brilliant populism. He buys a chariot, horses, and a royal guard of 50 men to run before him.
Projecting the image of an active, vigorous king, which is a stark contrast to his aging, stationary father.
He wakes up early and stands by the gate of the city, which was the ancient equivalent of the courthouse.
I love the mechanics of this part. So whenever a citizen from one of the tribes comes to Jerusalem with a legal dispute, hoping to get a hearing from King David, Absalom intercepts them.
He asks what city they're from, listens to their case, and says, "Look, your claim is totally valid and right, but it's a shame the king hasn't appointed anyone to hear you. He's out of touch."
If only I were judge in the land, I'd give you justice. That is classic political maneuvering.
And when people try to bow to him out of respect, he reaches out, grabs them, and kisses them like an equal.
It's like kissing babies on the campaign trail. He weaponizes his father's failure to provide justice. He does this for 4 years, slowly alienating the populace from David.
He builds a massive populist movement, exploiting the lingering tribal tensions between Judah and the northern tribes.
Finally, he asks David for permission to go to Hebron, David's original capital, under the guise of fulfilling a religious vow.
But once he's there, he blows the trumpet, declares himself king, and launches a full-scale, devastating coup.
The irony is absolutely suffocating. The king who won so many glorious victories abroad loses his own capital to his own son without a fight.
The conspiracy is so strong that David is forced to flee Jerusalem in a panic, taking his household and his loyal bodyguard with him.
He leaves the Ark of the Covenant behind, refusing to use it as a good luck charm, trusting instead in God's mercy.
The image of David leaving the city is one of the lowest, most humiliating points in his life. He walks up the ascent of the Mount of Olives, barefoot, weeping, with his head covered in mourning.
And as he flees, a man named Shimei from the family of Saul comes out, throws rocks at David, kicks dust at him, and curses him.
Yelling that God is finally paying David back for the blood of Saul's house.
David's men offer to cut Shimei's head off, but David stops them. He accepts the curses, acknowledging that his own son is trying to kill him, so why shouldn't this Benjaminite curse him? He is completely broken.
This is the relentless, anti-triumphalist nature of 2 Samuel.
Right. Unlike the monuments of Egypt or Assyria that only ever glorify their kings and erase their defeats, this book ruthlessly exposes the brutal reality of patriarchal family dysfunction, generational trauma, and political collapse.
The Civil War eventually culminates in a massive, tragic battle in the forest of Ephraim.
David's seasoned military veterans, led by the ruthless Joab, easily outmaneuver and crush Absalom's massive but inexperienced rebel army.
The text notes that the dense, treacherous forest devoured more men that day than the sword, and Absalom himself meets a bizarre, humiliating end.
He is riding through the forest on his royal mule, and his famously thick, beautiful hair, which he used to weigh every year as a symbol of his vanity and vigor, gets caught in the thick, intertwined branches of a great oak tree.
The mule keeps going, and Absalom is left hanging there in midair, completely helpless.
Now, before the battle, David had given explicit public orders to all his commanders, right?
Yes. Deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. David wanted the rebellion crushed, but he wanted his son alive.
But Joab is a pragmatist. He knows that as long as Absalom is alive, the kingdom will never have peace.
So when Joab finds Absalom hanging in the tree, he completely ignores David's orders. He takes 3 javelins and drives them into Absalom's heart.
And his armor-bearers finish the job. They throw Absalom's body into a pit in the forest and pile stones over it.
When the messengers run back to the city to bring the news of the victory to David, David's only question is it well with the young man Absalom?
When he learns his son is dead, he doesn't care that his throne is secure. He doesn't care that the rebellion is over. He retreats to the chamber over the city gate, crying out, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son."
His grief is deeply paternal, agonizingly raw, and entirely understandable. He knows that Absalom's death is the ultimate bitter fruit of his own sin with Bathsheba and Uriah.
But as a king, his grief is politically disastrous. Joab forces his way into David's house and delivers a harsh, necessary rebuke.
Joab tells him, "You have today covered with shame the faces of all your servants who have this day saved your life. You love those who hate you and hate those who love you. If Absalom were alive and all of us were dead today, then you would be pleased."
Joab forces David to wash his face, sit at the gate, and acknowledge his troops. The rebellion is crushed, and David is restored to Jerusalem.
But the kingdom is permanently fractured. There are immediate new revolts. Tribal tensions flare up again. The beautiful, hopeful unity of chapter 5 is completely gone.
And rather than ending the book with a neat, happy parade tying everything in a bow, the narrative does something structurally fascinating. It completely abandons chronological order.
We move into chapters 21 through 24, which serve as a theological appendix.
Yes, the final 4 chapters form what literary scholars call a chiasm.
A chiasm is a concentric ring structure. Think of it like a mirror or a literary bullseye.
Because ancient authors didn't have bold italics or highlighters.
Exactly. When they wanted to emphasize a point or summarize a major theme, they would structure the text symmetrically to draw the reader's eye to the center.
So how does this mirror work in these final chapters?
Well, the outermost layer, chapters 21 and 24, both deal with national crises caused by a king's sin,
resulting in divine wrath that is only resolved through intercession and sacrifice.
Moving one layer inward, chapters 21 and 23 give us detailed lists and heroic exploits of David's mighty men, the warriors who built his kingdom.
And right in the very center, chapter 22 and the beginning of 23, we find David's poetic songs of deliverance, which closely parallel Psalm 18, along with his last words, reflecting on the ideal of a perfectly just king.
The structure forces us to look at the macro picture of David's reign. It shows the tension between human frailty, the necessity of a loyal community, and the ultimate deliverance of God.
Let's zoom in on the final cryptic story in chapter 24 that closes out the book, because it is a wild, counterintuitive way to end a biography.
David decides to take a census of his military. He orders Joab to go through all the tribes and count the fighting men.
Now, on the surface, taking a census sounds like standard responsible government procedure. You need to know your tax base and your conscription numbers.
But God is deeply angered by this. He sends a devastating plague that wipes out 70,000 people, and David is forced to dramatically repent.
Why is counting people a sin? I mean, it seems so harmless.
Because in the ancient biblical worldview, a census is fundamentally about trusting in state capacity and military might.
When David was a young shepherd boy fighting Goliath, he didn't care about the numbers. He trusted the covenant God of Israel.
Exactly. When he was a scrappy fugitive hiding in caves, he relied entirely on divine deliverance. But now, as an established monarch nearing the end of his life, he wants a spreadsheet of his own power.
He wants to quantify his security. It's like a modern tech company that started with this pure, world-changing mission in a garage.
That's a really good parallel.
But eventually, they get massive. They go public. And suddenly, they stop caring about the original mission and just obsess over user data, engagement metrics, and quarterly market share to feel secure.
They lose their soul in the spreadsheets. David is trying to find his security in the size of his standing army.
He's effectively treating the people of Israel as his own personal property and military resource rather than God's covenant inheritance.
Exactly. Even Joab, who is usually the ruthless pragmatist, tries to talk David out of it, sensing that this is an act of arrogant self-reliance. But David pushes it through.
And when the census is finished, David's conscience strikes him. He realizes he has acted foolishly, but the judgment comes.
God gives him a choice of 3 punishments, and David chooses to fall into the hands of God via a plague, knowing God is merciful rather than fleeing from human enemies.
But this raises a massive question of fairness. Why does God punish the whole nation for David's spreadsheet obsession? 70,000 people die because the king wanted a head count.
This brings us to a very difficult ancient concept known as corporate solidarity.
What does that mean?
In the ancient Near East, the king and the nation were spiritually, legally, and organically linked. The king is the head. The nation is the body.
They are not highly individualized Westerners like we are today.
No, the actions of the king, whether righteous or wicked, inevitably bring consequences upon the people he represents. National liability was a harsh reality of their covenant structure.
The people share in the king's victories, and they suffer for the king's arrogance. However, the plague is halted when David finally takes full responsibility.
Yes. He looks up and sees the angel of the Lord standing by the threshing floor of a man named Uriah the Jebusite with a drawn sword stretched out over Jerusalem.
And David cries out to God, "Behold, I have sinned and I have done wickedly, but these sheep, what have they done? Please let your hand be against me and against my father's house."
He finally steps up and acts like a true shepherd. He offers to lay down his own life for his flock.
The prophet Gad tells David to go up and build an altar to the Lord on that exact threshing floor. So David goes to Araunah to buy the land.
And Araunah, who is terrified, offers to just give him the land, the oxen for the sacrifice, the wooden yokes for the fire, everything for free.
But David refuses, famously saying, "No, but I will buy it from you for a price. I will not offer burnt offerings to the Lord my God that cost me nothing."
He pays for the threshing floor, builds the altar, offers the sacrifice, and the plague is stopped.
And the theological weight of that specific location, Araunah's threshing floor, cannot be overstated for the rest of biblical history, can it?
Not at all. In later texts, this exact patch of dirt is identified as Mount Moriah, the place where Abraham was tested with Isaac.
And it becomes the very site where David's son, Solomon, will eventually build the great temple.
The entire book of 2 Samuel literally ends on an altar of sacrifice. There is no final, glorious military triumph. There is no parade.
There is just a deeply flawed, broken king standing on a patch of dirt in desperate need of mercy, making an atonement for his people.
Which perfectly brings us to the contemporary relevance of all of this.
Yes, the ultimate so what for you, the listener, today. We've walked through the mud, The ancient documents, the ascent, the danger of the holy, the abuse of power, the unraveling of the family, and the final altar.
When we synthesize all of this, the takeaways are staggering. First, as we said at the start, competence without character is ruinous.
Public power is deeply, inextricably tethered to private integrity. You cannot compartmentalize your morality.
If you are corrupt in private, it will eventually burn down your public kingdom. Furthermore, 2 Samuel shows us that God's kingdom ultimately advances by his grace, not by human perfection.
The text fiercely condemns sexual exploitation, the abuse of power, political tribalism, and the illusion of impunity.
It speaks directly to our modern cultural moment, challenging our deep obsession with celebrity leadership, PR management, and image control.
We are so quick to elevate gifted, charismatic leaders, but 2 Samuel warns us that giftedness without righteousness destroys everything it touches.
And it leaves us with this incredible, aching, messianic hope.
Because if David, the man after God's own heart, the greatest king Israel ever had, the guy who conquered Jerusalem and wrote the Psalms, if he was this flawed, if his family fell apart this spectacularly, then human politics alone will never save us.
No human CEO, president, or king is going to fix the human condition.
2 Samuel leaves us yearning for a true and final Davidic king. Someone who has David's shepherd heart, David's courage, and David's zeal for justice, but who does not have David's fatal flaws.
The entire narrative points forward to a king who won't just sit on a palace roof in safety and send others to die for his mistakes. It points to a king who will step down from his throne, enter the mud of human history, and lay down his own life as a sacrifice for his people.
We all have a little bit of the House of David in us. We all want the crown, right? We want the success, the legacy, the secure borders in our own lives, the corner office, the influence.
We want to be the hero of our own story.
But 2 Samuel forces us to ask, what are we willing to sacrifice to get it? Whose honor are we trampling to build our little empires? And crucially, what do we do when we inevitably fail? Because we will.
Do we try to manage the PR, cover up the mess, and send out our own Uriahs to take the fall?
Or do we fall on our faces, tear our clothes, and say, I have sinned?
That is the enduring, mirror-like challenge of the text. It asks us to look closely at our own lives and our own structures of power, no matter how small they might seem.
Which brings me to a final provocative thought for you to take away. Think about the blank spaces in your own life. Those areas where you have unchecked influence, power, or success.
Right.
Maybe it's at work. Maybe it's the dynamic in your family. Maybe it's in a community organization you run where everyone just defers to you. Who is the Nathan in your life?
Do you have someone who loves you enough and is brave enough to walk into your personal throne room and tell you a story that exposes your blind spots before they destroy your kingdom?
Are you insulated by yes men and PR managers? Or do you have someone who can point a finger at you and tell you the truth?
Because without a Nathan, the PR machine simply takes over, the ego inflates, and the truth is buried until the consequences become unavoidable and catastrophic.
That is something for you to mull over until our next deep dive. Remember to keep digging into your sources.
Just because the history is ancient, written thousands of years ago in a world of chariots and bronze swords, doesn't mean the mirror it holds up isn't reflecting us right now.
Sometimes the most unvarnished, muddy waters provide the clearest reflection of all.